Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2018 version of Ohio Beef Council's virtual field trips. I'm Campbell Parrish with the Beef Council, and we're excited to have you here. This is a smaller group here today, so we want to have a bunch of questions from you guys. Two ways to ask those questions. You can type them in chat, and I'll read them off to Craig. And then the other option would be come in front of your camera so we can see it and kind of give us a wave, and then I can pause and we'll unmute your mic. And then you can ask your question to Craig directly. So I'll stop a couple times throughout to prompt you for questions, but realistically, anytime you guys have those, let us know. We did get some questions in yesterday from Hardin Northern, so we'll make sure we'll get those answered throughout the process as well. So without further ado, we will turn it over to our host and star of the show, Mr. Craig Corry of Xenia, Ohio. Craig, great to have you here. We appreciate you taking the time out of the fields to visit with folks today.
That's okay. Glad to be here. And I'm hardly the star of the show. The stars of the show are these ladies that you see behind me. I'll probably let them do most of the talking. And we got them up here brought them up close to the barn where you can get a little better look at them. A couple shy ones didn't want to make the trip this morning, but we'll maybe have them later this afternoon. My name's Craig Corry. You guys up in Hardin Northern, I know about where that's located. So to give you a perspective where we are from your school, you'd easily want to either go over to Lima and hit 75 and come south to Dayton and then east about 20 miles, or you could take US 68 down through Kenton and just stay on 68. And from where I'm standing, far enough in your trip, you'd be about 4 miles that way, straight ahead of me. So that gives you an idea. And of course, you guys in Jamestown, you're not far away. You know about exactly where we are. So good morning to everyone. Our farm is about 500 acres in size. It's not all devoted to the cattle operation. So if you're in an ag class, you understand the rural land judging perspective. So think about that rural land scorecard. Classes 1, 2, 3, and 4 land are used for row crops. So about 400 450 acres of our land is for corn, soybeans, wheat, hay for the cattle, obviously. And then we have some land that is not well suited for row crops. So it is committed to what we would call, what you would learn, class 6. That's the orange box on the scorecard. That's permanent pasture. So from the view, you can see where the cows spend a lot of their time in the spring and summer is on permanent pasture land. It's rolling. It has a lot of slope. It may be very shallow till we get to solid rock. So for corn and soybean production, it's not well suited, but it raises grass. So in one way, you could say we're kind of in the solar industry business because the sunshine and the rain falls and the grass grows. So we use the cows to harvest the grass. These are beef cows. That we have about 35 of them that live here year round. Their job is to produce a calf every spring. We have a spring calving system. So beginning in either February, March up through April, and usually by the 1st of May, all these cows have had a calf. Occasionally one will have a set of twins. That does occur in cattle. And even more rarely, there can be a set of triplets. That's pretty rare, but certainly every one of these has a calf every spring, to which it will then stay with its mother and nurse milk from her up through the spring, maybe into early summer. Some of them are weaned at different times, and then those calves are fed separately when they're big enough to grow on their own feed. We feed them in a different facility, or some of them are shown as calves that some of you might take to the fair in 4-H or FFA. We have calves some of those calves are sold to people around the state, and we've got a couple that this year that have already gone to other states. So that gives you a little idea about this herd. Length of a cow's productive life for us. These are some of the questions we've heard about in the past. A cow will have her first calf when they're about 2 years of age. That's when they're bred when they're yearlings, and the gestation for a cow is about 9 months and 9 days. So it's just a little bit longer than humans, a little over 9 months as an average. So when they're about 2 years of age, they have their first calf. And there are a couple in here that are 15, 16 years old. The average is probably about 10, and then their feet, legs start to go bad. But if they have good health, good nutrition, which this year we've had a lot of green grass, mild weather, give them good shelter, keep them dry and out of the mud and bad conditions in the winter, the cow can really live a long time. So does anybody have any questions about that before we go any further?
Guys, if you have questions, have your teacher throw them in chat, or like I said earlier, come on in front of the camera and give us a wave. But maybe while we're waiting on questions to come in, Craig, one of the questions our Northern had was about some of your management practices. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you make sure we're maintaining these ladies. And then also, I think one of the things that people are often surprised about is, pasture, you just think of the grass going out there and it just kind of does its own thing. Talk maybe about, it's a lot more than that, kind of what goes into making sure that it's well maintained and you're getting the right grass and growth that you need.
Right. As far as the question about management practices, everything we do has a reason. Management is, a cow can survive in a pretty harsh environment, but if we use some proper management, we can increase the productivity of the herd and extend their life and their productivity. They need care and they need management. So as far as managing the grass, we use soil sampling, tissue testing of the grass to test for fertility. Now, obviously, through their manure, it gets a lot of the nutrients get recycled, but green grass needs nitrogen to make it grow. And we have to apply a small amount of nitrogen fertilizer in the spring to encourage the grass to grow. Sometimes you can even, a management practice would be to maybe apply a small amount later in the season to stimulate grass. We have good growing conditions. Most of you guys are probably still mowing your yards. So as long as the grass in your yard is growing, that means the grass in the pasture is growing and the cows have something to eat. We try to encourage different species of grass. If you guys play football, a football field or a soccer field has a lot of fescue, which is a kind of a coarse leaf. It's a cool season growing grass and grows better in the fall. It's tough, got a good root system. So when your cleats hit it, gouge it up a little bit, it recovers pretty fast. That's kind of like a cow's hoof. Cow's hoof cuts when it rains and the ground is soft. Some fescue in the pasture is beneficial to allow it to recover. Whereas maybe in the spring, an orchard grass, bluegrass is a common species that's in a cattle pasture. So a mixture is using a mixture of seed or establishing that type of thing is just from a grass management standpoint. That's important that we do that. Fertility, species. We've used a mower. Weeds, anywhere grass grows, weeds are going to grow as well. So we have to clip it. And sometimes we raise the blades on the mower to clip the weeds off high. That gives the grass less competition and keeps it productive.
Very good. So, grass is critical to grazing out on pasture. Talk maybe about that. How long can you do it? Maybe there's a couple of places you do graze that you do not, that people wouldn't think about on like crop residues.
Right. As far as the number of acres of grass that we have on this farm, compared to some farms in southeast Ohio, they have 5 or 6, maybe up to 10 acres of grass for one cow to live, and they may not make hardly any hay. They don't harvest much hay, but they can stockpile pasture in an area of the farm or the ranch that is set aside so that the cows will naturally be able to go in and graze it in the fall and throughout the winter. In this part of the state, land is pretty valuable, and we don't have that much rough land to set aside just for pasture. So as Campbell mentioned, we have fences around a lot of our cornfields. So these cows can get a lot of feed value because of this big part here called their rumen, which is their first big stomach. They're able to digest, and their 4 stomachs and digestive compartments, they can go out into a field that had corn harvested from it, and she's pretty friendly this morning. And they can eat the stalks. They'll pick up any grain that was left that the combine missed, and they can get a lot of feed value from the husks and the silk and the things that were left, parts of the plant that were left over. So utilization of crop residue, soybean stubble. These cows can eat just about anything. That's kind of how we stretch on our farm. That's how we stretch the feed supply, so that they can have something to eat.
Obviously, you definitely have some docility issues. Let's maybe talk about cattle handling and the big animals, and it's very important to keep them safe as well as you. May not have that many issues with your cow right there, but maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, some of them are pretty tame. This one has traveled a lot of miles as a retired show heifer, being in a lot of shows. And I don't know, cattle really don't maybe have a personality, but they certainly have behavioral characteristics. And just like this one here likes its back rubbed. If I was to quit, the minute I quit, that's when she lets me know, I liked what you were doing, so keep giving me a back rub. Some of the rest of them are not quite as tame. They're not quite as friendly, but docility or behavioral attitude. If a cow is mean, we want to try to avoid those, and maybe we use that as a selection factor that we don't retain one like that in a herd. Most of ours are pretty docile. They get to be creatures of habit. They'll come up to the barn as we've done these video field trips for a while. They hear the sound of one of our voices, and they're trained. Just like a lot of you have pets, even your dogs, cats. They develop behavioral tendencies, and cattle sometimes are the same way. They learn the feeding time is a certain time every day. Something breaks that routine, they wonder what's going on. They don't necessarily get mean, but that it raises questions in their mind. Is my biological clock says it's feeding time. Why is the feed late? So they bawl, or they'll let you know if they're out of sync with their clock.
Very good. So Craig, maybe before we transition here, let's maybe talk about, grass is great and, rumens can thrive off it, but there's some minerals and other things that we kind of need to make sure that they've got a balance of to really keep them well-maintained, healthy, growing a nice calf.
Right. If you could see in the background of the pictures, we tried to get further downhill a couple weeks ago and we lost our signal. So if you see that thing that's off to the left with the red cap on it, that is a salt and mineral feeder that a lot of cattle pastures will have a fixture like that in it. And cattle like salt. We'll show you just a plain white salt block, just like you and I like potato chips and salty pretzels or something like that. Salt is an important mineral in their diet. They drink a lot of water every day, and salt helps regulate water and mineral intake, which is necessary for their bodily functions. So we provide a salt block and a granular mineral mix that's available to them. They know when they want it. It's called free choice feeding. So when they want it, they come up to get it. A cow's tongue is very, very rough. It's like sandpaper, and they can lick. They'll stand and underneath that thing and push the curtains out of the way. The curtains around that machine or that appliance are sometimes, if you think of deep woods off and have insect repellent, where we put it on ourselves when we're outside in the evening. We want to keep flies and other insects off of our cattle. They bother them. They stand around in the summertime under a shade tree and swish their tails to keep insects and flies. That's their defense mechanism. But if we can apply a little bit of insect repellent to their face, and then they'll butt each other and rub against each other, and they scratch on that thing that's hanging at an angle, and it has insect repellent in it, and then it spreads it over their body, it parts their hair, and they get coated with it. So it helps keep them more healthy. Flies carry diseases that infect their eyes, and a lot of humans get pink eye, conjunctivitis, eye irritation. If grass gets really tall and has a lot of seed production, then that can get in their eyes. The pollen gives them an allergy, just like it does us humans. So that's one of the things that cattle producers use to lessen the issue there. The other thing over here on the side is called a creep feeder. And if you can see the red bars that are in the front, it's called a creep feeder because it allows calves to creep ahead of the cow herd to get extra feed. So we can put a feed that's usually got some grain, a lot of grain in it, higher energy. So as a calf is able to eat more on their own, they can get access to the feed in that thing there, but the cows can't get through the smaller opening and get feed that they really don't need at that point. But it allows the calves to creep ahead, and that's how it gets its name. And of course, the calves they develop a taste for the salt as well too. So over time, that the practice of giving them making it available to them, and they will figure out what they need to eat themselves. That's what usually applies here.
Very good, Craig. We had a question about waters. How are the cattle getting their waters? Do you use a variety of things? Maybe talk a little bit about that to make sure that they've got all the hydration that they need.
Yeah. Water is a lot of people overlook water as a nutrient. Out west, it's not uncommon on some of the big ranges, big pastures out west, where a cow might have to wander 25 or maybe 50 acres just to have enough forage, enough food to eat and they can thrive. They survive out there. They do fine, but they've got to walk a long distance to tank up on water. And when that first stomach that is called the rumen, the first of their four stomachs, can hold 40 or 50 gallons of water, when it's time for a cow to drink, she's thirsty, she can drink several buckets of water and stockpile for what she's going to need, maybe for a day or two or more. So here in Ohio, where water in our pastures are smaller, they can drink out of the pond or maybe a spring, or we have a place that's developed where we have a tank that catches spring water that flows naturally underground and then comes to the surface. So the cows here have water available to them all the time. And I mentioned a little bit ago about being creatures of habit. Sometimes you can set your watch by a certain time of the day. The herd will collectively as a group wander over to the water tank. They stand patiently and take turns as the boss cows. The more aggressive ones drink first. The rest of them kind of know their place and sit back. And eventually, once they've all had a nice drink of water, they wander back to the grazing area and start filling back up with the grass supply of the day. Now, in the cattle that are fed in a confined situation and a little more controlled environment, they'll have a water supply available to them all the time, but it is usually supplied by our well. And then in the wintertime, then that means that's a maintenance and a management activity that we have to keep them thawed, keep the water flowing, and keep them a good fresh supply of water. But it's always clean and available to them all the time.
Very good, Craig. So got a question about your feed and what you're feeding your cattle. So it may be a good time to kind of transition over and we can show some folks what you're feeding. So while you guys are doing that, I'll just give you guys a couple quick facts about the Ohio beef industry in general. So we are currently the 13th largest producing state in the United States, the second or third largest east of the Mississippi. We have 17,000 beef farms across the state of Ohio, and they are in all 88 counties. So Ohio's got a lot of consumers as well. If you start to think about Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, Toledo, And we also have quite a few cattle too, so it's a fun balance. We've always prided ourselves at the Beef Council of saying, anybody can be on a beef farm in less than an hour, pending bad traffic. So we're kind of over here. Going to check out a couple more, calves that Craig's feeding out, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what they're eating. So Craig, the question was, do you guys mix your own feed or do you guys buy from a mill? So maybe we can talk about what you got here and then how you guys utilize that.
Okay, those are good questions. In our case, we usually mix our own feed just because we raise corn. We raise corn as that's our main cash grain crop. So it's relatively easy to get around here. We have trucks, wagons, grain bins full of corn at any one time of the year. The other reason that we utilize a lot of our own corn in the not what the cows eat, but in what the calves that have been weaned and are going to be fed to market weight. That's the majority energy source in their diet. It gives us a way of marketing some of our corn through the cattle. So it kind of diversifies, spreads out our risk. It does require a little more work because we have to process the feed. It's not quite as simple as just getting some shelled corn, and you guys all know what corn looks like. It's not quite as simple as just feeding shelled corn to them, but we grind it a little bit. Some places have a roller that crushes the kernel a little bit. This has a little bit of some of the protein pellets mixed in with it. But corn is high in energy. No matter how you can feed it whole, a cow will eat it that way. You can grind it a little bit, crack it. Out west, they have the big feedlots. They have, if you go to one of them, it smells like they're making cornflakes. They steam it and they flatten it out, and it's really palatable. The cattle really like it. Corn tastes good to them, and most of the time we kind of sometimes refer to corn as cow bait, because if we need to get the cows to come up, just like we showed you this morning, if we need them to come up close to the barn with about a half of a 5-gallon bucket of corn, and they know that they're going to have access to eat a couple mouthfuls of that, they will come up. So they really enjoy it. It's very palatable to them. It is high in energy, so that's the main energy source for their carbs or carbohydrates. But corn is low in protein. So being beef cows, we need them to make muscle. Meat is muscle, muscle is meat. So to encourage muscle development, just like in humans, they need good sources of protein. It happens that in farms here in Ohio, in this area, soybeans are a common grain that we raise. And soybeans are high in protein, but they're kind of low in energy. So in a feed ration, whether it's hogs, cattle, chickens, doesn't make any difference what the animal is on a farm, many of them are going to be fed a mixture of corn with soybeans. A cow would eat raw soybeans, but that's maybe not always the best way to manage it and deal with utilizing that raw grain, because in the case of, let's take corn. Most of you guys that drive a car, if you fill up your gas tank, it has ethanol mixed in with the gas. So commonly in Southwest Ohio, a lot of farmers sell corn to grain terminals that in turn then sell it to a distillery, an ethanol manufacturer, and they take some of the sugar and the carbohydrate content of that corn and make alcohol that's then blended with our gasoline. Right now in the United States, it's about 10%. So a lot of the corn that we raise in the country makes ethanol for alcohol that goes into our gasoline. After that product has the alcohol taken out of it, the distiller's grain is a very good feed product that goes into large farms for cattle, hog, poultry consumption. They can mix that in. That's a very good source of feed for those animals. And in the case of soybeans, soybeans have a lot of oil in them. So if we squeeze those soybeans and cook them just right and process them just right, they get a lot of oil, which can be made into biodiesel and other petroleum products. The ink that is used to print newspapers such as USA Today, a lot of the magazines that all of us read, that is using soybean oil ink, and it's actually stays on the page better. It's that was a miraculous thing that somebody figured out how to make ink out of soybean oil. It's biodegradable and is a very good product that gives us a good market for our soybeans. So what's left of the soybean meal after the oil is taken out is then they can process that stuff and squeeze it down into these pellets, which are high in protein. That's got a little corn in it. But those protein pellets there are about 50% protein. So in our case, we'll take mostly corn, add a little bit of this, and then for some of the calves, we even add this grain here, which is not commonly raised by a lot of you, but it looks like oats. It's actually called spelt. It has a feed value very similar to oats. If you eat Life cereal or Total, a lot of breakfast cereals have oats, oatmeal. That's very similar to what spelt is. So the calves, really, it has a lot of fiber and a lot of bulk, and in their digestive system, very palatable. They really like it. So we kind of mix those things together in the proper, using the science to analyze the grain and develop a good ration. And then we try to make every batch the same. It meets their nutritional needs. They don't like a lot of rapid change. So once you get a good recipe and a good mix, just like those of you that feed cattle for the fair and other animals, they don't like to keep changing the program all the time. You get them on something that works and keep them there. This stuff here looks a lot like sand. And I'd mentioned the mineral that we had available for the cows. The calves use it as well. That's ground phosphorus and calcium. So they need that for their bones, their teeth, their skeleton, and has a little bit of salt mixed in. So they go up and they lick that with their rough tongue whenever they need it. There's a plain white salt block, 50 pounds. And like I say, they're rough tongue. They can make that thing disappear. That'll last a couple weeks maybe, depending on how many animals have access to it. People that are deer hunters, they set salt blocks out. Deer look for salt as well. And there are times when in a cattle pasture, there'll be deer out around the salt and mineral feeder for the same reason the cows are. In this area, a lot of you may see these black tubs. And I've learned that over the years, when I was in freshman and sophomore, when I was in ag class in the 70s, we didn't have technology like this. And it took somebody, a good animal science background, to figure out how to make these tubs. And the thing is hard. It's kind of like rock candy. It's a little sticky, but with a cow's tongue, they get, in the wintertime especially, they get most of their protein need, their vitamins and minerals can come from licking that tub. So the way that thing is developed, it has molasses, which is sort of like syrup and sugar. It tastes good to the cows. So since it has molasses, it is attractant to them. And then it has salt mixed in the proper ratio, so that it's sort of like eating chocolate covered pretzels. They taste really good. The chocolate is the attractant, the molasses is the attractant, but once they've had enough of the vitamins and minerals for the day, the salt kind of kicks in on their tongue and they say, oh, okay, I've had enough, and they walk away. And normally a cow will lick about a pound, maybe a pound and a half of one of those things. They weigh 250 pounds on average. So we set them out. The rain and snow doesn't bother them. They are very versatile, weatherproof, and when the cows need another one, we let them have a free choice all the time. And this thing over here, of course, a lot of you are familiar with a bale of hay. We have a regular square bale of hay. A lot of you guys help bale hay for people in the summer. This is a forage of a different package here. It might look like a giant marshmallow, but it's certainly not. It's wrapped in plastic because it was a round bale of hay that was baled when it was wet. Now, what keeps what keeps hay from molding or becoming rotten, or even hay that's baled too wet can even catch on fire and spontaneously combust in a barn. That's wrapped in plastic. So part of your science lesson for the day is that the anaerobic bacteria, aerobic bacteria use oxygen, they're exposed to the air. Anaerobic means no air, no oxygen. So anaerobic bacteria help the wet hay that's in here ferment instead of rotting and going rancid and becoming not a good feed at all. Anaerobic bacteria help preserve this stuff, and it basically ferments. And if you're familiar with silage, you've ever heard the word silage. Some people call these baleage because it's in a bale. But this winter, when the weather is really cold and the cows have a greater need for nutrition because their calves inside of them are growing and getting the fetuses are becoming larger, they need a little more nutrition on their nutritional plane. We give them these, take the plastic off, and the cows will find a high energy, very easy to eat, palatable feed source for them. So does anybody have any questions about any of the feed or things like that?
Guys have any questions for Craig? Make sure you keep throwing them in chat. Hardin Northern's been doing a good job of that as well. And then if you want to ask live, make sure you just kind of wave your hand and we'll unmute you. But Craig, you kind of talked a little bit about the nutritional technology that we have now and how it's really started to it's revolutionized how we keep these animals healthy and growing properly and keep them happy. Maybe talk about some of the other technologies that we use, maybe on the genetic side of things, and even things like RFID technology that these folks may be familiar with.
Okay, yeah. A person might think that other beef cows, that's pretty low tech. Well, there's so much technology available out there. As far as electronic technology, you guys see these cows have, we use a numbering system to identify them. Sometimes if they have unique color patterns on the white on their face or on their legs or on parts of their body, we can tell them apart from a distance. But many times, the more cows you have, it's very difficult to do that. And one of the management practices that a cattle producer will use is even if they have a gator or a four-wheeler or the pickup or they're walking through their herd, if they see something that is not looking healthy or needs some care of a certain different type of management or something's wrong with it, we want to identify it by its number. Maybe not all, some cows might have names, but most of ours just have numbers. So we use a numbering system so we can tell. We number the calves the same as the cows, so we can always pair them up if we have to. But there are just different colored markers that we write the numbers on with a paint marker so we can read them. Now there is a RF called an RFID, radio frequency identification cards, it has a computer chip in the tag that in the button that is a unique number to that animal, and then with a tool called a scanner, we can pass that close to that. It's just like a chip people put in their dogs, their pets, that we can identify that number of the animal from a distance with radio frequency technology and keep track of it that way. A lot of dairy farms have tags that either they have a neck collar or a tag that when that animal approaches the feed bunk, it's the proper amount of feed that female needs is dispensed based on the computer tracking which animal is approaching the feed bunk. When they milk, they can keep track of the milk production from the animal based on the ID of that tag. But on a beef herd, maybe not so much. Other kinds of technology that we use, though, since we don't have a large herd, we try to have the best genetics from the bull side that we can afford and have available to us. So we use a lot of artificial insemination on the female herd. Also embryo transfer, where we can have a female that is a donor and use artificial insemination to breed her. And then a week later, those embryos are collected through sort of an in vitro process and then carefully sorted under a microscope. And a cow might produce several embryos for transplantation then into recipient females, or you might call them a surrogate mother. That'd be the same principle that's sometimes used in humans. And what that enables us to do is take a genetically superior, a really good cow, mate it with a really good bull, and then you get several calves instead of one calf per year, which is normal. You could get several calves out of a really good mating all in 1 year. And out of a productive cow's lifetime, that makes her worth a lot of money. And that's why at some sales there are females that sell for a lot of money.
Absolutely. So guys, we got about 10 minutes left here in the field trip. So if you got those questions, make sure you're throwing them in or jumping in front of the camera. One of the things that Harbor Northern sent in yesterday via email was, it's kind of a big question, but what's one of the biggest issues facing the beef industry right now?
There are a lot of challenges, issues facing, there are issues that face agriculture in general. So it would affect things, the weather affects our crops, affects our grass. There are years when if we have no pasture by the 1st of August because it's really dry, we have to deal with that. That takes extra management. It costs more money if we have to use feed that we have, hay, products that we have harvested somewhere. It costs us money to do that. It's a lot cheaper to let the cows go out on the grass and eat it themselves. But if there is no grass in their pasture to eat, that means we either have to sell cows, reduce our herd size, which we really don't want to do. We have to spend our own money or work a different way to harvest forage from another place and get it back to them. So weather is always a big challenge issue that faces, especially you guys up in northern Ohio. Probably not the cow herd so much, but these guys that are going to be finished out for market weight in a feedlot setting. There's a lot of manure to get out of the feeding facility, and that has to be applied. It's an important nutrient source for our crops, and so we apply it to our fields and recycle it. It's a great natural fertilizer, of course. That's common sense. That's obvious. But in the wintertime, there are challenges to making sure the soil condition is right. In northern Ohio, issues, there are regulations and laws that have been enacted to regulate when that can happen. Southwest Ohio, where we are, it's not mandatory yet, but most everybody here certainly use good stewardship, good conservation practices to manage when we apply nutrients back to the field.
Great question, Craig. Another question that came in was, maybe what are some of the things people wouldn't think about when it comes to beef farming? What maybe is something that would surprise them in terms of, either what you're doing or an issue that you've got to deal with?
Oh, wow. I don't know. It seems like we get a surprise here almost every year. Things change. The weather usually is the wild card that we don't understand. A simple thunderstorm could be very costly to a herd of cattle. If cattle congregate underneath trees in a storm, and if lightning was to hit that tree, that could be devastating to a small herd of cattle. April 3rd, we had a tornado come through the neighborhood, and if it blows trees down on the fences and the cows, now we have a surprise. Besides checking on neighbors and getting roads back open so people can travel, we might have an issue with cattle that are going to escape and wander through the neighborhood. So things like that always seem to come up as surprises. We can plan the best we can, but we're always unable to address everything.
Sure. So we got a question from Greenview. So let's go ahead and switch over to them. And you guys are unmuted. Let's hear your question.
Can you talk about safety around the animals, areas where you should be looking out?
Yeah, we're lucky too. Our bulls are they're still bulls, but animals they're animals. They're unpredictable, and as I said, they can have behavioral patterns. But the most docile cow that has just had a newborn calf may be extremely, I'll say, extremely protective of that newborn calf. She might be fine. She might be fine to us on a day like today, but when they get close to calving or they have just had a newborn, to be in the same pen, one needs to be wary. Now, luckily, in most of our cases, we're aware of their behavioral tendencies and can keep an eye on that. But when in doubt, safest thing is stay away or make sure you have somebody to help. Animals, they get sick and they may need a vaccination they may need a shot, just like most of us have been vaccinated for diseases. And out in the open country, the cattle are exposed to a lot of things. So if we can't just walk up to them and give them an injection, most of the vaccines that we give now are subcutaneous, which means it just goes under the skin. We don't penetrate clear into the muscle or anything. But still, to get that cow might not even feel it. Her hide is leather, but they may not let us get that close to them. So we have to have a facility where we walk them between two narrow gates and just hold them still for a little bit and check them out. Or we have a veterinarian that gives an annual physical exam to them real quick. It just takes a couple minutes, and then they're on their way. But restraint, safety, that's certainly things that we have to take into consideration.
Very good. So we got about 5 more minutes. So we want to make sure we're getting your guys' questions answered. So Hard Northern, do you guys have any questions? We can switch over to you. Unmute your mic. Any questions over there?
Any questions, guys?
No. Campbell, didn't we have a question about how we market, where the animals are marketed and what weight?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hard Northern, if you guys don't have any questions, we can absolutely talk about that.
I think we had a question about at what weight is an animal at market weight, and that depends a little bit on their genetics, on their feeding program, on the individual animal. Just like if we have brothers and sisters, we don't all, even if sometimes if we're a twin, we don't always end up at the same height, same size, same weight. So animals are no different. Cows have different calves every year, and even though it might be the same bull, the same cow, not all of their calves are always going to be identical year after year after year. A lot of it depends on the feed. On average, these guys here that you're watching eat were weaned in August, and they were probably right now 450 to 550, maybe 600 pounds. They've already spread out a little bit. Some of them are older than others. They will be fed on a high grain on our feedlot ration until next summer, and they'll start be market weight at about 1,100, maybe up to 1,350 or 1,400 pounds, depending on that particular animal. It'll be 14 to 16 or 18 months of age when they're going to reach market weight. Some of them we sell as freezer beef to local butcher shops for processing, but the vast majority of them we market through auction sales at stockyards, and then those cattle are purchased. They might be at a restaurant such as an Outback, Longhorn, Lone Star, steakhouses like that, or at Kroger, Meijer, major chain grocery stores, in the meat counter.
Very good. So that wraps up our time, unfortunately. So go ahead and we'll unmute your guys' mics, and let's thank Mr. Corry for letting us come out and learn a little bit more about what he's doing, taking some time out of the fields to give us a little bit better insight into what we're doing. So Greenview, we'll throw it over to you guys. Thank you guys very much for coming. And Arden Northern, let's flash over to you real quick. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Craig, on behalf of Beef Council and on behalf of the schools, thank you so much for bringing us out on a beautiful day, and we will let you get back to work. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, guys. See you.
Thank you, everybody.